Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
And welcome to this episode of Yogananda Podcast, where we discuss line by line the autobiography of a yogi. We are on chapter 12, part 9. So we're working our way through. We do have quite a few episodes or parts left to get through. It's quite a large chapter, but if you do want to read along with us, we've got the full quartet here today. Hello, guys. Welcome. Hope we're all doing well, aren't we? All super duper. So if you do want to read along, listeners, you can start from Master Always Had Young chelas, and you can read to the footnote number 15. So you'll find that at the end of the sentence, a subtle spiritual structure is hidden just behind the bodily mechanism. So you can read with us and comment along the way. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it. We are going to talk about Sri Yukteswar and his chelas and the master himself, Sri Yukteswar, as well as the spiritual healing topic. So we're going to talk about what Sri Yukteswar said on that, and Yogananda as well. And we're going to finally talk about the new science that was in the footnote. So it's a longer footnote with quite an interesting quote in there from a certain Charles Robert Richet that we're going to talk briefly about as well. So those are the topics. So let's jump in. So we'll start with Yogananda talking about Sri Yukteswar saying that he always had young chelas disciplines in the ashram, and their intellectual and spiritual education was his lifelong interest. And this is something we probably would be accustomed to understanding, that yogis would have various disciplines, but here we have the age mentioned. Priyank, can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, disciples who, and discipline is very closely related, as we'll find out a bit later. But yeah, lots of disciples. So in the, this is an established custom even now. It's quite similar to, when we send our children to boarding school from the age of sometimes 5 or 3 or 4 sometimes. But this is a spiritual boarding school essentially. And it's not essentially yogis that would host them. It's gurus. And the stage of life, the 4 stages of life, this is the first stage of brahmacharya, where the child is made to live with their mentor or guru, and it's called a gurukul, which is like a family or clan of the guru. And in that environment, they kind of take them all the way up to their kind of late teens, early adulthood, actually. And they acquire knowledge of science, philosophy, scriptures, music, logic, all the good stuff, and the arts as well. And then at the end, they have to earn their way out, something called the Guru Dakshina. They have to pay back what they've learned and live a righteous life and other things like that.
Sounds like a really nice tradition to get, like, it sounds like something where you're a parent and you want your children to have a spiritual education. And so you look at the local ashrams. Also sounds like it doesn't cost anything, which is in these days amazing, right? When you think of what education costs these days. And they get taught discipline and spirituality. But then it also sounds like quite the commitment. You mentioned the word guru. So is it usually like this would be their guru for life? Or because when you go to boarding school, those people are not my gurus afterwards when I'm out of there. Quite the opposite, I would say.
Yeah, but they do have like pastoral care and things like that. And I think the oldest schools were always associated with a church or something like that, where they had pastoral care, didn't they? But in India, this there's a really big commitment for a parent to essentially forgo their child because it's for the greater good. So you'd have to be quite takes a special type of devotee to really, put their desire for parenting to one side for the greater good of the child, to send them to this kind of setup.
Yeah, I was going to ask the question if anybody here was to have children, would they send their child off to one of the Yogananda's life schools? That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? I thought about that myself. Talked about it with my
yes.
wife. So yeah,
Mhm.
let's see. Definitely something that I suppose the soul would have to be ready for, right? And they would have to be doing it voluntarily to a great degree. But here we have then the description from Yogananda saying that just before Sri Yukteswar passed on, he accepted 2 6-year-old boys and a youth of 16. So he was still taking people into his care, giving them training. And we have a distinction here, or a link that Yogananda is making between the word discipline and disciple. Just as Priyank, you mentioned there before that they do go back to a similar lineage, and the word discipline is taken from the Latin word disciplina, meaning instruction and training, which is derived from the root word discere, if I'm saying that right in Latin, to learn, and that is where they both come from. Mike?
It's quite a blessing when you're a 6-year-old and you become Sri Yukteswar's disciple just before he passes on, because you had the luck to find a God-realized master. And I would think that this would be maybe a multi-incarnational link that is established here. So it sounds like people would say, why would he accept new students just before he passes? But those people might be still his chelas today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's this eternal bond that goes beyond the physical death, that the masters are here with us. I wondered actually what you guys thought about this, because it did strike me that in a practical sense, you're 2 6-year-old boys and a youth of 16, just before, shortly before Yogananda says Sri Yukteswar passed, he accepted him as a hermitage residence. And so today, if you can contrast it, we're blessed with the teachings, the lessons, all the literature that we have. We've got a wealth of, literature to read from, that probably more than what we could ever really digest just in one lifetime. And the volumes that Yogananda had put together before he passed. But really, what do you think would have been the case here with Sri Yukteswar? How would the young disciples would have continued the training after Sri Yukteswar's passing? Because maybe there wouldn't be as much sort of material to read from in Sri Yukteswar's written language. Or Mike, what do you think the case was?
So Sri Yukteswar also had disciples, and maybe they went on to be disciples of Sri Yukteswar's disciples afterwards. I don't know if that's allowed or in the system. They would always be able to say, I still met Sri Yukteswar as a kid and have some memories with him, which is a really big blessing. That it reminds me of when I was a kid of like 10 years old. I have memories spending time with Brother Bhaktananda, and I oftentimes he gave me comments and advice unasked, really, because as a kid I had no idea what questions to ask that were that were important, and somehow they stuck in my memory. And sometimes when I have certain thought patterns, a sentence by Brother Bhaktananda comes up, and I'm like, oh yeah, now it makes sense. And I would think that it's this kind of relationship. Maybe those kids went on to go with Mukunda school that he would start later. I don't want to spoil, but yeah, we don't know. Yeah, so they might stay in the same lineage. Yeah.
The ashrams actually carried on both of Sri Yukteswar's ashrams. So they, you'll remember before Swami Sri Yukteswar's Mahasamadhi, he was essentially telling Paramahansa Yogananda, send someone to look after the Puri ashram, for example. And this is essentially for things like this, these young disciples and the management of the ashram and things like that. So someone would have taken over. Swami Satyananda also took over at some point as well. So they may not have taken on the role of a guru, but they would have been the head of the ashram, similar to Swami Dayananda, who was in charge of that ashram that young Mukunda joined just a couple of years ago from this date that we're talking about, probably, or maybe 1 year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Well, they were in safe hands, these young 6-year-old boys and the youth of 16 that just joined in. Plenty of spiritual companionship and mentorship post Sri Yukteswar's passing. But before that, the comments here from Yogananda tell us that the residents loved and revered Sri Yukteswar, that he would clap his hands, from a mere clap of his hands, they would all come eagerly to his side. And Priyanka, you have a comment on this certain behavior, let's say, that today might be seen as one way versus what it
Yeah,
was.
I can't. I'd love to do this, clap my hands. So, like, if I'm leading a little group, then they know that it's time to do something else or whatever. But I'd never actually do it. In India, you would do it even to this day. Like, I've been in pilgrimages to India, and when the group has to move on, or when we have to get back on the bus, or when we need to, gather our belongings for various things, or wake up in the morning. Once when we were camping, um, the gathering call was waking up with claps. So and then everyone else would join in with the claps. So yeah, it's something that's done even now in India, but not necessarily something that would be considered very nice probably in the UK.
Very polite in the UK. People might get their backs up quite easily, but
Too
here
much
we know
pride.
too much pride, indeed. Yeah, here we know they completely submit themselves to the master, so they know that it's not any dominating behavior, right?
How dare you clap along a lord of the house?
I don't know. I was a Boy Scout, and Boy Scouts are from the UK, I believe. Baden-Powell was British, I think, and he had a system of different hand signs that you would do, and then I think this was the hand sign that I know it looks weird, yeah, and especially a German shouldn't do it, yeah. Sorry, but this meant that you should be quiet and be in a row of two in front of the group leader. So there was discipline in those groups. So
I think in the military environment and scouts and things like that, it's they have to create their own sort of rules, don't they? That don't necessarily apply on the streets of Richmond.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard of one where you hold a spoon. The only person who can speak is the person holding the spoon. But no, Sri Yukteswar doesn't need any of that. He simply claps and everybody knows, yeah, they're going to come to his side. He has something important to say to them, and they would all listen intently. And there's a interesting comment here from Yogananda to say that when Sri Yukteswar's mood was silent and withdrawn, that no one ventured to speak. But when he was laughing, his laugh rang jovially, and the children, the youth, the disciples would have looked upon him as their own. And it made me think, this is a interesting view into the reality of living with an avatar, living with realized being, that you would be constantly in tune with your master. And so here we see it, everybody was in tune with Sri Yukteswar. He was certainly the leader of the group. And we know really in Yogananda's ashram and really towards the end, the final days of when Yogananda was with us, Sri Dayamata mentioned quite a bit of her interactions with him. And there's a great video, actually. Maybe we'll include it, include the link in the description of this this episode, where you can listen to what Sri Dayamata said about it, because if you haven't heard it before, it's fascinating. So there's a YouTube video on that, talking about how Yogananda himself was very withdrawn in the latter days, because he was channeling so much and doing the writings and putting together the texts that we all enjoy and read to this day. So the yeah, it would be pretty amazing to be there, and be one of these disciples to witness the avatar Sri Yukteswar at the time. And interestingly, a very practical comment here, from I suppose, a more personal side of Sri Yukteswar, that he seldom asked for the help and personal service of others, and he wouldn't accept the chelas' help unless it was offered cheerfully. And so that's a very important lesson in there. And he said, Yogananda said, Master himself would wash his clothes if the disciples forgot the privileged task. Greg.
Seems like these are like very elementary lessons that you need to learn on day one of joining the ashram. If you have to do something, whatever it is, do it cheerfully. Secondly, if or otherwise Guruji won't accept our service. And similarly, the silence thing, and speak when spoken to. Don't speak to Master if he's not in the mood of speaking. Like, you need to pick this up, because otherwise there'll be a lot of problems for a harmonious ashram life.
Yeah, I think it's quite a different attitude than what we find ourselves doing in school, right? Because in school, I felt a lot of things I did because I felt compelled to do them. And here you really get the spirit of, you offer something to the master or the teacher. And I feel like that way it's also not just good for whoever you render service to, but also the one who does it, right? I feel like it keeps your own mind at peace and in a happy state. You don't feel unrest because you have to do something, but you feel happy that you're offering something that you want to offer.
Mike, were you one of those children that didn't raise their hand before speaking in the classroom?
Absolutely. Yeah, especially in younger years. Yeah.
Lauren, I could tell you were one of those people as well, for sure.
What, calling out? No, I was quite well behaved.
Of course you were. I was pulling your leg.
But at home, I was a very free spirit, especially before I went to school. So my parents had quite a task reining me in, or trying to rein me in, at least. It didn't work.
Do any of these little prescriptions apply to your classroom?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, I guess so, because if you're getting the students to actually enjoy their work, and find the joy in it, then they're going to learn better. But really, that's up to them. You can't make them enjoy it, right? So you just have to create an atmosphere of learning that appears or is fun and has a purpose.
Yeah. Do you guys remember in your early years that if you were ever struggling with like having right attitude? Because I feel like I had no handle on this as a kid at all. I feel like this came way later.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The How to Live schools by Yogananda, I suppose, would teach us quite a bit about this, but definitely not in the common sort of westernized schools. I think it's more about the, learning your ABCs and various sort of functionalities as a youth, rather than how to actually live in your attitude. I mean, I could only imagine, how it must have felt for the disciples that, that they obviously revered him and loved Sri Yukteswar, and they would have come up against it if they didn't act cheerfully, if they weren't cheerful when doing tasks. Sri Yukteswar would have refused their help. That must have been quite a shock, and a big lesson. I can only imagine how much of a big lesson that would have been as a child to have experienced that.
Imagine having to overcome your ego as a child. I feel like that is a monumental task. And either you are born with this gift already, but learning it, I find that because you are in this, I feel like your parents, they have this obligation to raise you and keep you happy. So I feel like as a child, your ego is larger than as an adult, and I don't think you really care. You you care a lot about yourself. And I feel like being disciplined in an ashram like this, I find that difficult, but it's probably very helpful in later life.
Sure. In the next paragraph, we see the mastery of the master, Sri Yukteswar. We see that his usual garment was the traditional ochre colored Swami robe. And we have mentioned this before in the past, right, Priyank? But maybe you can tell us a little bit about this.
Yes, the ochre robe is something that you'll see lots of saints in India are wearing. Very simple robe. And it's also nice that all our monastics, they carry on this tradition of ochre. And you'll actually notice that they wear two tinges of ochre. So Guruji has added a bit of his own flair to the tradition. So the brahmacharis have to wear a slightly lighter shade of ochre, I think. And the brothers, or swamis as we refer to them in India, they have a very vibrant ochre orange color. And it's the color that kind of represents renunciation and purity. And it's a sign basically that they're in this all-in path with, seeking God essentially. So it kind of commandeers respect from all parts of society. But this color is also very important for I think it's the Agna. It's the color of the Agna chakra. So the polar opposite to the medulla. So the third eye. So yeah, there's lots of references, but essentially it's attachment. It shows that whoever's wearing it is detached, and their material and worldly desires are renounced. Well, they're attempting to renounce them anyway.
Maybe just one thing to throw in on the robes. In the previous paragraph, it was mentioned that Sri Yukteswar would wash his own clothes if any of the disciples forgot the privileged task. I had read somewhere, I can't recall, but washing your clothes separately to certainly other people's clothes is quite important in the yogic practice. So they would live a life of, say, a minimalistic life, a austere life. But one of the reasons on the clothes front was actually the energetic, how would you say, the attachment, from the body and the clothes, and the transference of that energy. And that's actually quite a subtle thing with clothes, that yogis would wash their own clothes separately to others. They wouldn't just throw it in with the whole family's dirty laundry into one large cycle. So something interesting on that front. But certainly it's the attention to detail in the yogic practices to the nth degree. And here we see that he wore indoor he wore laceless shoes that had been made in accordance with yogic custom, which were tiger or deer skin. And again, being vegetarian, I think we could all agree today, I wouldn't be rushing out to buy tiger or deer skin items. Everything I have would, as far as absolutely possible, would be animal free. But certainly this has a meaning, Frank, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's slightly also similar to your point about the washing your own clothes and the transference of energy, insulating yourself and your energy, as it were, because that's the same purpose of having, tiger or deer skin. And, we have a silk. Guruji tells us to meditate on a silk cloth that drapes over the chair and under our feet. It's precisely for that reason. And I read in God Talks with Arjuna that, because there's a verse which Lauren's going to read out, but he said that yogis would actually, because they'll be dwelling in the forests, right? So they'll be dwelling in nature. So they'd come across deer skin and other animal skins, and it's obviously got very, very good insulating properties. So they would use it rather than buying it from a store or, massacring any living thing for that purpose. But we can do that reading perhaps after. I think you got a couple of other points to make.
No, really. There was a symbolism really on the tiger skin that had a deeper meaning about the inner power and bits like that. But by all means, you've got a reading.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
jump into it.
chapter 6, verse 11, if you want to, Lauren, read out the text, and then also just a portion of the Guruji's reading on that.
The yogi's seat in a clean place should be firm, not wobbly, neither too high nor too low, and covered first with kusha grass, then with a deer or tiger skin, then with a cloth. And then he says, in the modern world, in both East and West, neither kusha grass nor animal skin is necessary for the meditation seat. A very satisfactory substitute is a seat made of a folded woolen blanket with a silk cloth placed over it. Silk repels certain earth currents better than does cotton.
Nice. And the further metaphor could be brought in to say that it's the inner strength, the power, and resilience. There's a story about Shiva only wearing tiger skin clothes for this reason as well. So it does have deeper meanings, but certainly the silk and the wool today we can definitely use for similar insulating purposes. I thought to myself, God, I felt guilty when I read this initially, the traditional ochre colored Swami robe and the austerity and the minimalism. I thought, gosh, how many pieces of clothing do I have, and how many shoes and things do we have? Like, this is very minimalistic. The description here of Sri Yukteswar and how he lived. I think one time at the worst of my times, I had maybe 30 pairs of shoes. So if anybody wants to come forth and admit anything else,
30. Okay.
come join me.
No, just shame on you, Chris. That's all I want to say.
Shame on me? Okay. I'll take it. I'll own it. Different shoes for different occasions, mainly sports. So, that's my my reasoning. Mike?
They often associate like having less possessions with a spiritual lifestyle. And I think a lot of yogis that I talk to, they try to adopt this as good as they can. And so I do the same. Like, I think these days it's very common that you donate your old clothes and then try to only buy something when you need it. Keep the cycle alive, not make the wardrobe something that keeps growing and growing, and then you need a second one. Yeah. And having it, I think it's also a bit generational. I think our generation tends to have a lot less stuff than the previous one. And I think that's healthy, because every time you give something away, it kind of feels like you're releasing old things. And yeah, that's part of life.
Gotta thank the clothes before you let them go.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
For the service.
So,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah. There's a Netflix TV series on that, isn't there? Japanese
Marie
lady does a
Kondo.
great job on that.
Yeah.
Marie Kondo, that's the one. So good. Yes, we shall not hoard. So Sri Yukteswar was also very skilled in the linguistics. He spoke fluent English, French, Bengali, and Hindi. And I thought was an interesting comment here. It said his Sanskrit was fair. Any insights on this? Is the why fair, not fluent? I would have actually thought that would have been the first one on the list to say fluent. Frank?
It's exceptionally complicated language, because what happens is you'll have, it's not like in English where each word is separate. If for example, we use where are, if we're going to say where are, we say you can do apostrophe where are, in when you write it, you can say that, but in spoken English, it's always you say the whole thing, right? If you're speaking properly. But in Sanskrit, you can have 3 or 4 lines of text, and because of Sanskrit rules, it can be all merged into one sentence, 4 lines into one sentence, and then it's hideously complex to read, and not then just to read, but to recite, because half of the battle, or the reason, as I said, as we'd mentioned earlier in Sanskrit, is to recite it and recite it correctly. So the sound, it comes, emanates exactly as it is meant to, and then therefore it has the desired impact. So it's horrifically complex. It's not so complex to just recite if you know it, but to read a scripture and then to just read it fluently is really, really challenging, which is why he may be able to just pull out of the ether a Sanskrit shlok that he may just know from his past incarnations or his mastery over anything. But then to pick up a book such as what I'm doing right now, and then just to take a section and then not just recite it, but to translate every single part of it is really challenging.
I see. And a comment there in the next sentence that really bamboozled me. Yogananda said that he patiently instructed his young disciples by certain shortcuts that he had ingeniously devised for the study of English and Sanskrit. Brian, can you give us any insights as to what this might mean?
Yes, I can. So such shortcuts were also are also a common feature in Sanskrit courses right now if you do them at your local learning establishment. So for example, I've got one right here. So you can see for listeners, the consonants are split into different columns, and then they're also different rows, right? So what that represents, for example, and this is the kind of thing that Sri Yukteswar would have done, is that where is the sound coming from in your mouth? Is it at the very back? Is it at the very front? If it's very front, it's a very dental sound, like a toothy sound. Whereas if it's from the very back, then you don't really use your teeth, using your tongue more. Where is your tongue essentially in your mouth? So all of those kind of, you can split all the consonants in that kind of order, and this is why lots of programming languages like to use the structure that you can use with Sanskrit to make sense of it, as opposed to what other languages we're used to writing in. So there's that. This essentially, you have to, if you're going to learn it, then you have to do all these little tricks. Otherwise, what you could learn in a year, you might take 20. And this is the basics.
Nice. Whenever I read it, I thought, well, maybe he's helping them tap into this divine learning that Yogananda did when he picked up his English. When he sat
I'm just
for 10
scratching the
minutes.
surface here, but it goes very
totally.
he's got very probably ingenious ways to memorize things and case endings and things like that.
I would have loved to have more information that if Yogananda could have shared on that. I wonder if it's elsewhere, maybe in some other text or book somewhere. So moving on then to this part on spiritual healing, and this is quite an important part of our practice, I would say, our learning to get insights that Yogananda has given us. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, and Sri Yukteswar talks about it here at Yogananda references in the Autobiography of a Yogi. And he says that Sri Yukteswar was not attached to his body. He was very cautious of it, and that he pointed out that the divine is once properly manifested, is only done through physical and mental soundness. So he discounted all extremes. And when I read this, I wasn't going a bit red in the face, but I definitely thought, okay, this is a good lesson for me, because here we have an example of a disciple in Sri Yukteswar's ashram that wanted to fast for prolonged periods of time. And laughingly, Sri Yukteswar said to him, why not throw the dog a bone? And there's a footnote here, number 13, that says that Sri Yukteswar approved of fasting as an ideal natural cleansing method, but that the particular disciple in question was overly preoccupied with his body. And I recall when I met my now wife, I was probably in this camp. And I wonder if you guys have ever been in this camp before, where you start to learn the lessons and you realize that you've done it completely wrong your entire life, and then you try to correct it, and suddenly you're doing everything sort of too much to the extreme, essentially. And interestingly, I see this in society, right? Like you have these big extreme swings in society from left to right of political spheres and ideologies and so on and so forth. And so it's actually a really important lesson, just wrapped up very neatly here for us in fasting. for this this devotee who was doing extreme fasting that Sri Yukteswar had to correct him on. So he goes on to say that the body is a treacherous friend, that you should give it its due and no more, that pain and pleasure are both transitory, and that we should endure all dualities with calmness, trying at the same time to remove ourselves beyond their power. And this really explodes the conversation in many great directions here when he says imagination is the door through which disease as well as hearing enters. Disbelief is in reality of sickness, even when you are ill, an unrecognized visitor will flee. So there's big topics here for us to discuss, but first, sorry, Priyanka, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I think the line that the body is a treacherous friend is just such a powerful concept, isn't it? Because we're almost taught the opposite, aren't we? I listen to your body. What is it? Care for it and you nurture it. All these kind of things. But here is literally saying it's a traitor. Your body is not after it. Your whole. It's not going to be beneficial just listening to your body if you're thinking essentially in the long run. And here it's literally saying give it its due, no more. So the minimum. So it's like keeping the tank. If you've got a really nice car, keeping the tank virtually empty. Don't give it any more than it actually needs. And I love
So
that he's brought. You go on.
Hold on, Priyanka. Are you saying that spa days and massage parlors are out of the question then? Are you going to deprive me of my one guilty pleasure?
Yes. Well, to each their own. We have our we each have our challenges that we have to tackle. But the whole pain and pleasure are transitory is really good as well. It is some of my favorite verses in the Bhagavad Gita are literally around this, to treat dualities the same and going above them essentially. So this whole section is just absolutely beautiful because he's put together so many different philosophies into just 3 or 4 lines here.
Yeah, and he describes all the extremes and that we need balance between all of them. So he says he's not attached to the body, but it's important to have a healthy body on the spiritual path. And then at the same time, he says fasting is good every now and then, but too much fasting doesn't seem necessary. And there's more to this. At the end of the day, there's this energy in us that heals the body, and we have to let it. And by overindulgence, we hurt the body, and it's really just the ideas to live a balanced life and have a balanced diet and have a balanced attitude to the body. So the body is not like a car, like Priya mentioned, and we should spend so much attention to it, but we should also not neglect it.
And Sri Yukteswar himself, Yogananda, said that he was in excellent health and that he never saw him unwell. And there is a footnote to say that actually once in Kashmir, Sri Yukteswar was ill, that Yogananda was at this time absent from him indeed. Yes. Priyanka?
Often taking the karma of others. Gurus endure some illness, don't they?
Yeah, we saw that in Yogananda, certainly in his latter days. Lauren?
I love that he added that footnote in. As if someone somewhere might have researched and found that, yes, he was ill, and then, perhaps question the validity of some of these statements in the books. Like Guruji covers everything. It's all about the truth, right? And I just love that. He didn't have to add that in, but he did for the point of being completely open and honest, right? It's lovely.
Someone such as the 4 of us, Lauren, perhaps, that are delving into every single line of the book.
Yes. Yeah.
Priyanka would be quick to find it, I'm sure.
Yes.
No. Painstakingly slow. Nothing is quick with this project that we're doing.
Indeed, indeed. And Sri Yukteswar was saying that to show the body respect for worldly custom is permitted, but they should consult the doctors, really, if any illness was to come up. And this is an interesting point here to say that, yes, we have a higher method that we can hold to try to keep ourselves in top physical condition, but should there be other issues that Sri Yukteswar here is saying, by all means, use a physician. But we should carry on the work of healing through God's laws as applied to matter. And so maybe, Lauren, on this topic, you can kick us off. We've got a few bits of readings from various sources, but there's a quote from Yogananda, Lauren. You can talk about the idea of this idea of sickness and illness from Yogananda's perspective.
Physical sickness is due to different forms of toxic conditions, infectious disease, and accidents. Mental sickness is caused by fear, worry, anger, and other emotional inharmonies. Soul sickness is due to man's ignorance of his true relationship with God. Ignorance is the supreme disease. When one banishes ignorance, he also banishes the causes of all physical, mental, and spiritual disease.
Nice. And Priyank, you've got some readings, I believe, then from Scientific Healing Affirmations to follow up.
Indeed, it's on a similar vein. So this really refers to the line where he's saying that physicians should carry on their work of healing through God's laws as applied to matter. So in this Scientific Healing Affirmations in part 1, it's written here, the God-given power of man. Nothing is greater than cosmic consciousness or God. His power far surpasses that of the human mind. Seek his aid alone. But this counsel does not mean that you should make yourself passive, inert, or credulous, or that you should minimize the power of your own mind. The Lord helps those who help themselves. He gave you power. He gave you willpower, concentration, faith, reason, and common sense to use when trying to rid yourself of bodily and mental afflictions. You should employ all those powers while simultaneously appealing to him.
As you utter prayers or affirmations, always believe that you are using your own but God-given powers to heal yourself or others. Ask his aid, but realize that you yourself, as his beloved child, are employing his gifts of will, emotion, and reason to solve all difficult problems of life. A balance should be struck between the medieval idea of wholly depending on God and the modern way of sole reliance on the ego.
I think Guruji, where Sri Yukteswar has said that physicians should carry on their work and apply essentially God's laws. I feel like that nowadays the laws that are applied in medicine are only the physical laws. And I know they probably have to do that, but a lot of this is, common sense stuff, like your own willpower and, your own faith, attitude, all this stuff that he's mentioned here in Scientific Healing Affirmations. If a doctor does prescribe those things, they're usually secondary and tertiary to the medication and other things like that, as opposed to the primary, which is obviously what Sri Yukteswar is talking about here, and what Guruji has described in the Scientific Healing Affirmations, which I think really should one day will benefit from a 180 spin on that.
I think the method of healing mentally, like trying to eradicate the mental causes of your physical disease, is a very higher ages approach. And I think if people in a few hundred years will look back at our medicine today, they will go like, oh no, why did they do that? And like, I don't know if you guys know the story of St. Francis when he ultimately passed, he had like I think some kind of infection in his eyes, and he was treated by applying a burning hot iron rod to his face, and then I think they were cutting open his temples so the blood could clean itself. And so today we would think, maybe don't do that. And I think our medicine is more sophisticated now, but it will ever evolve towards the spiritual way of healing the body, I would think.
Yogananda talks about this quite a bit actually through fasting, herbs, sunlight as a disinfectant, energization exercises, and a whole slew of ways of keeping ourselves healthy, but to electrify the body and to purify the blood and to not lose the vitality, like life energy within us, through not exerting ourselves in ways that we shouldn't, sexual energy and things like this. So there's actually quite a bit said on this topic that Yogananda has given us, which is really nice. Prank, do you have anything?
Yeah, my wife was telling me about one of her patients that came in, and it was like a picture of health compared to when she last saw him like 2 years ago. And he was saying, my doctor, I went to my doctor because I think he said I had headaches or something. So then they were pretty bad. And then the doctor gave some pills for the headaches, and then they were making him lose sleep. And then the doctor gave him medication to help with the sleep. And then that was causing something else and something else. So lots of different things and lots of medication. And then what ended up happening was that he actually had some sort of tumor in his brain, but they didn't actually tackle that. They tackled all these other things that it could possibly be, and made him spiral into this insane medication loop that was causing problems that he didn't even have, like insomnia and depression and things like that. And then when he just came off all of that medication and tackled the tumor and the actual root cause, right? And this is the problem with our system, because our GPs like have no time to actually delve. They got 10 minutes per patient or whatever it is in the UK. It's just terrible.
Don't get me started. On the
They just
system
want to treat the impact, not the cause, isn't it?
Yeah.
Easily get pushed away in the system if you're not careful, but that's why we should be doubly mindful of the teachings really here, that we don't as far as possible end up having to rely on that let's say stunted system. But it's a way of coming full circle, right? We have to be patient with the time, the era that we're in. We're certainly not quite there yet, but here Sri Yukteswar drops some wisdom on us, and he says that the superiority of mental therapy is something to take note of, and that the often repeated wisdom is the greatest cleanser. He told the chelas. Mike?
And I must say, we are embracing this as a society, right? Like when I think of how far mental therapy has come from just in my lifetime, it's, I would say, monumental, the acceptance and the amount of people who do it. I mean, I think LA is maybe the capital of mental therapy in the world. I don't know anyone here who is not either in active therapy or has done it before. So I think this is a great sign of progress.
Yeah, I think on that note, actually, it's for us on the SRF path, I had a conversation along these lines with one of our fellow devotees who's passed on, and she said, really don't mix the two. But we've got our master, we've got our guru, we've got our therapist, the best that we could ever hope for. And that, us on this path, we should be careful not to be
guru psychiatrist.
Guru chiatrist. Yeah, exactly. So, for us, it's maybe slightly different because we have that, we have that to rely on.
I don't know if I agree with this, because I think we are also humans and we also go through problems like everyone else. And if at some point we feel like on top of our spiritual routine and life, we feel like we need therapy, then maybe that's the way to go for us as well.
Yeah, that's the SRF line, isn't it? Seek medical
Yeah.
counsel whenever required. But brother, what was it? Oh yeah, I was just picking up one of the monks from the airport the other day, and to drop him to the center, and he was saying that someone close to him is suffering from dementia, and he said one of the key causes of dementia is actually loneliness. So it's depending on how you live your life, if seclusion and things like that. And I said to him, as meditators, obviously a lot of us, we choose to live alone and all that kind of stuff. Do you think then we would then be susceptible to that? And he's like, I don't think that would necessarily. He said, I don't think it would necessarily apply to us, because essentially we meditate with our 6 BFFs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it makes sense actually to think about it that way. Loneliness, separation of others might separate the synapses in the old noggin in the brain, maybe causing dementia. Interesting concept. But continuing on then from what Sri Yukteswar was saying, that he did have many doctors amongst his disciples, and that they had studied physiology, and that they shouldn't go any further, that they should go further and investigate the science of the soul, is what Sri Yukteswar told them, which would have been quite an interesting take for them. I'm sure it would have been outside of their wheelhouse in their day-to-day studying. And he goes on to say that a subtle spiritual structure is hidden just behind the bodily mechanism. Priyank.
So much, a lot there to unpack. But the first slightly troubling thing for people that are studying the medicine path is that you do your 5, 7, or 8 years of training, and then Sri Yukteswar was essentially saying that this should be the beginning. Now you should study the science of the soul. So they already have like the longest career path, don't they, to work from training to qualifying. But Sri Yukteswar is saying that he's almost suggesting that it's incomplete, isn't it, unless you go into study the science of the soul, which is quite challenging which would be quite challenging for most doctors, wouldn't it? Because they're already in so much debt and things like that. But the other thing here was that deep thing is that he was saying that they're essentially linked. So if they do study the science of the soul, he's saying that there's a subtle spiritual structure that's hidden behind the bodily mechanism, which almost suggests that structure has a very, very, very great influence on the bodily mechanism and physiology, and hence they need to go further. If they're really going to if they're just going to treat the symptoms, then finish the degree and carry on, make your money. But if you're going to treat the cause, then you have to go a lot deeper. And the best doctors probably do, don't they? You don't very, there's some doctors that aren't in it just for the money. They want to do multiple disciplines, and the disciplines that aren't necessarily linked economically. But for you to be a really good doctor, then you need to know these things, right?
And there are a lot of doctors that are physicians, and then at the same time they have a degree in homeopathy, or they have a degree in some kind of alternative healing, and they try to make the two work together. And there are two fundamental different approaches, right? One of them, the scientific ways you try things out, you take the results, and then you apply accordingly, create therapies accordingly. And the other one is that you have ancient wisdom, or you have wisdom from a guru, and in order to apply your same scientific methods to it, you would have to become a yogi yourself and basically become self-realized to become this spiritual doctor. or at least you need to progress on the spiritual path and be on it. So, and I'm sure there are doctors like that that are spiritual and spiritually evolved. And even in this sentence, Yogananda says that Sri Yukteswar had doctors as his disciples. So I would say those. If you have one of those, then count yourself lucky, because they can probably see things from both sides.
Totally, yeah. I mean, we know now the strength of or the power of the mind through placebo, right? So placebo trials and people being able to heal themselves, get better suddenly because they think they're taking a pill that's going to do the job when they're actually not. So yeah, we know a lot more about it now, and there's actually tons of studies. We could spend easily another hour talking about this simple one subject and all the new revelations that are coming out. But Yogananda did leave us a nice footnote from a courageous medical man, and this is really the topic on, let's say, new science, that Charles Robert Richet, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology. We've got a quote from him that we're going to read, Lauren and Mike. Lauren, do you want to kick us off?
Metaphysics is not yet officially a science recognized as such, but it is going to be. At Edinburgh, I was able to affirm before 100 physiologists that our five senses are not our only means of knowledge, and that a fragment of reality sometimes reaches the intelligence in other ways. Because a fact is rare is no reason that it does not exist. Because a study is difficult, is that a reason for not understanding it?
Those who have railed at metaphysics as an occult science will be as ashamed of themselves as those who have railed at chemistry on the ground that pursuit of the philosopher's stone was illusory. In the matter of principles, there are only those of, oh wow, French pronunciation, of Lavoisier, Claude Bernard, and Pasteur. They're experimental everywhere and always. Greetings then to the new science, which is going to change the orientation of human thought.
Epic. So it's a really epic quote there from Charles Robert Richet. Charles, he was born in 1850. Just a bit of backdrop on him. He studied in Paris. He became a doctor of medicine, doctor of sciences. He was a professor in physiology, and he onwards from 1887 in the faculty. He was a professor there, faculty of medicine in Paris. So in 1913, he was awarded this Nobel Prize for his research on anaphylaxis, and he actually invented that word. So he was a person of distinguished in the medical field in the mid-19th century. But the other names that we have mentioned here, Antoine Lavoisier, he was 1743, so he came before him, and he really was at the center of the chemical revolution in the 18th century and had a large influence on both the history of chemistry and the history of biology. The other individuals, Claude Bernard, French psychologist, founder of experimental medicine. He really had lots of groundbreaking discoveries, from the pancreas to the liver, the blood flow and control of the nerves. So finally, then we have Louis Pasteur, 1822. He was born, French chemist and microbiologist. He revolutionized medicine as well on his work to disprove spontaneous generation, establishing the germ theory of disease. So there's lots to dig into on these names mentioned, and really what we can pull out of it is that what Yogananda, I believe, wants us to pull out of it is that we are, through individuals, like those mentioned here, are making, ground on what was previously thought and what will be thought in the future of what is possible through the mind and the subtle structure, this subtle spiritual structure that exists behind the physical form. So there's lots to break down there, but maybe not quite for today, because we're going to stick on the subject of autobiography of a yogi. But that does conclude this part of the 12 part 9 of the autobiography of a yogi. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Have we missed anything, folks? Anything you'd want to add before we call it a day today? No, shakes the head. Okay, well, with that, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you
Oh,
next
sorry,
time.
I've got one quick thing,
Oh, you did?
Chris.
Okay, jump in.
Mr. Richer said that I was able to affirm that more than before 100 physiologists that our five senses are not our only means of knowledge. And sometimes reality reaches this intelligence in other ways. So what, in reference to our teachings, what was he referring to there?
The radio signal of God, maybe, that comes to us through the mouth of God, through the medulla. Energies coming from that, I would have presumed. But what do you think?
Yeah, I thought maybe intuition.
Yeah. What do you think, Frank? What's your take?
I have nothing to add. I thought I would
That's a
just
cliffhanger and a half, isn't it? At the end.
I thought you would. I thought there might be some better responses amongst us. I personally haven't got one to offer, but it feels like there's some like massive thing there that I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into meditation and what this whole SRF path is for, that the realization of ourself, right? And we get that knowledge of ourself through the means of union, right? And our using our mind and our powers of concentration, and eventually we let those go so we can be with spirit as we are. And that doesn't come through the five senses. You know, true knowledge is beyond the five.
You know, what I kept thinking about in this passage is the structure of reality. That we are a reflection of the greater cosmos, i.e. that, you know, there's the gross physical form, there's the astral, there's the causal. And whenever I read this, I thought to myself, okay, he's talking about the senses. What, in my mind, that's the physical. You know, he's mentioning here the five senses are not our only means of knowledge. So we're not actually going around in the physical world, taking in knowledge through the five senses, the eyes and, you know, the taste and so on. But we're taking in intelligence in some other ways. And in this subtle structure that exists behind the physical form, that's sort of what I was thinking about, this subtle energy, you know, the astral form and so on. And we talk about the mental and the emotional bodies of man, and how then if we have this, the supreme sickness is one of the soul, the ignorance of our reality and our connection with God, and that sort of filters down through the physical form. So the intelligence is the supreme, i.e. causal and beyond, how that filters down. So that's where my mind was going, Priyank. Is that a better answer for you?
No, it's not. I'm not happy.
Not satisfied.
I would like a listener who knows more of Charles Richer's works to respond on this, because I don't know. But the other thing I was gonna just quickly add was that he says in this quote that because a fact is rare is no reason that it does not exist, or that it's difficult isn't a reason for us to not try to understand it, etc., etc. So this kind of, for me, points to him talking about a self-realized master. So it's rare, right? Self-realized masters are rare, and the powers that they possess are rare as well. So when, you know, in the Bible and obviously in all of in Autobiography of a Yogi, there's countless references to metaphysical powers that displayed by masters, and those are unexplainable by natural scientific laws, but he's essentially saying that they are there. Just because they're rare doesn't mean that they don't exist, but we need to dig, essentially, and kind of similar to what Sri Yukteswar was saying, like go physiologists should go a bit further and study the science of the soul, because there's vast vistas that open up. But yeah, I'd like to know more about Rishi. I haven't had a chance to do that.
I'll link you to a book that he authored, along with another author called Joseph Maxwell and Laura Finch, called Metaphysical Phenomena, Methods and Observations. There you go. There might be more hidden wisdom in that 474-page book that you can dig into dig into for us.
Yes, if I was hosting, perhaps I would do that.
Yeah, it's endlessly fascinating, and I think we've talked about it before, where science and religion in some way might come full circle, and this is probably it's along those lines, right? And Charles is one of the individuals in recent times that have been pushing the envelope toward closing the circle. But certainly for now, Sri Yukteswar's wisdom and Yogananda's wisdom are what I'll be studying. But anything else, Drink? Did we want to?
Yes, it's all good.
Anything else? Satisfied. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next episode.
Jai Guru.